She said she was pregnant, but my body knew the truth before my mind did. It wasn't joy that hit me. No rush, no warmth, no sudden clarity. Just a strange pause inside my chest, like something had stepped back instead of forward. Laura told me in our kitchen, leaning against the counter, one hand already resting on her stomach. That gesture felt practiced, like she'd tried it on before I ever saw it. "I'm pregnant," she said. I smiled because that's what husbands do. I hugged her, felt her arms around me, felt how normal it all looked from the outside. Inside, though, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just misaligned, like a picture hung slightly crooked. We'd talked about kids before, enough that this shouldn't have shocked me. Still, the timing didn't sit right. The distance between us lately didn't sit right, and the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't understand yet. "Aren't you happy?" she asked. "I am," I said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. That night she slept easily. I didn't sleep at all. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing, replaying small moments I'd ignored for months. The way my uncle stood too close to her at family gatherings. How she laughed harder at his jokes than anyone else's. How she'd started spending more time helping my mom, always when he happened to be around. I hated myself for thinking it. He's family, I told myself. Blood doesn't cross lines like that. Except sometimes it does. Over the next few days, Laura talked about appointments and vitamins, about how we'd rearrange the spare room. She kept placing my hand on her stomach. "It's yours," she'd say softly. Every time she said it, something in me pulled back. Not because I knew it wasn't, because I wasn't sure it was. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she angled her phone away from me. How quickly messages disappeared. How she showered the moment she got home. And how my uncle, who'd always been around, suddenly vanished. No calls, no visits, nothing. People don't disappear without a reason. One evening I tested it. "Mom said your brother hasn't been around much," I said casually. Laura froze, just for a second. "Oh," she said. "I guess he's busy." It was a small lie, but it was still a lie. That night I checked her phone. My hands shook the entire time. What I found wasn't proof, it was absence, deleted threads, gaps, and my uncle's name erased completely. You don't erase someone unless you're terrified of what's left behind. When I finally asked the question, when I said his name out loud, her face changed. Fear. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a pregnancy. It was the beginning of something much worse. Silence feels different once you notice it. Before, it had been comfortable, the kind that settles into long relationships where not every moment needs words. After that night, silence felt intentional, heavy, like something waiting to be acknowledged. Laura didn't push me the next morning. She moved through the house carefully, like a guest instead of a partner. She made coffee but didn't ask if I wanted any. She talked about neutral things. Weather, errands, work. Anything that didn't brush against the truth sitting between us. I answered politely, briefly. She was watching me. I could feel it. Not openly, through reflections, doorways, the corners of rooms, measuring my distance, my mood, whether I was still safe to lie to. That realization landed harder than suspicion. She wasn't afraid of losing me yet. She was afraid of what I might say to someone else. I went back to work, but my mind didn't follow. I reread the same email 3 times without understanding it. At lunch, I checked my phone. No messages from my uncle. That absence was louder than anything he could have said. That evening, Laura finally tried again. She sat on the far end of the couch, leaving space between us like it mattered. "I know things feel tense," she said carefully. "You're imagining connections that aren't there." There it was. Not denial, not explanation. Gaslighting, slow, gentle, almost kind. I looked at her and said, "Then answer one question honestly." She nodded quickly. "Anything." Why did you delete his messages? Her mouth opened, closed. I didn't, she said. The lie came too fast. I didn't argue. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and set it on the table. I took pictures before they were gone. Her face collapsed. Not into tears, but into resignation. I panicked, she said. I didn't know what to do. You panicked, I repeated. Or you were hiding something? She didn't answer. That was the moment I understood she wasn't fighting the accusation. She was fighting exposure. I'm going to ask him, I said. Her head snapped up. No. The panic in that word told me everything. This stays between us, she said. That sentence confirmed it. I didn't go to him that night. I needed to know I wasn't acting out of rage. I drove aimlessly instead, ended up sitting in a grocery store parking lot with the engine off, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Bloodline. That word kept circling in my head. Not family, not loyalty. Bloodline. The next morning I called him, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. By the time Laura confronted me that night, accusing me of blowing things up, I already knew the truth was moving, whether she wanted it to or not. And the silence that once protected her was starting to crack. I didn't confront him right away. That surprised me. I'd imagined anger would take over, that I'd drive straight to his house and demand answers. But anger never came cleanly. What I felt instead was cold focus, the kind that settles in when something has already broken and now needs to be examined carefully. Because once I said his name to his face, there would be no pretending this was confusion. So I waited. And the waiting confirmed everything. Days passed. Still no call from him. No message. No casual check-in like he used to do. Just silence. Deliberate and heavy. The kind of silence that isn't absence, but avoidance. Laura noticed my restraint and mistook it for weakness. She started acting hopeful again, talking about the baby like it was settled, sitting closer to me on the couch, touching my arm like proximity could reset reality. I let it happen, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see how far the lie would go if I didn't stop it. 3 days later, my uncle finally texted, "Can we talk somewhere private?" No apology, no explanation, a request. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Tomorrow, noon." He sent back a thumbs up. That alone made my stomach turn. I didn't tell Laura. The next day, I drove to a grocery store parking lot on the edge of town, neutral ground, public enough to keep things contained, isolated enough to feel exposed. He was already there, leaning against his truck. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, tired, guilty. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile. I didn't return it. I didn't ease into anything either. "Is the baby mine?" I asked. The question hung there. He didn't laugh, didn't deny it, didn't ask what I meant. He looked away. That pause told me more than any confession could. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. "That wasn't my question," I replied. "You should talk to your wife," he said. "I am," I said, "right now. Through you." He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't remorse. It was fear. "She said it was yours," he muttered. My chest tightened. "She said that?" I asked. He nodded. "She said she was sure." Sure. That word again. I took a step closer. "Did you sleep with her?" He hesitated just a second, but it mattered. "I don't know," he said. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "You don't know if you slept with my wife?" "I mean, I don't know if I'm the father," he corrected quickly. Too late, I hit him. Not hard enough to knock him down. Hard enough to make it real. He stumbled back, shocked more than hurt. "You already crossed the line," I said. "A long time ago." He didn't fight back. He just stood there, smaller than I'd ever seen him. "She came to me," he said. "She was lonely." "No," I replied, "you don't get to blame me." Silence. "I ended it when she said she was pregnant," he added. I believed that. Cowards always retreat when consequences appear. I walked away without another word. because now the truth wasn't theoretical. It had a face, a voice, and it had been standing across from me my entire life. After I spoke to him, there was nowhere left to hide. Laura felt it the moment I came home. She didn't ask how the meeting went. She didn't pretend everything was fine. She just sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded like someone waiting for a verdict. "I'll tell you everything," she said. I nodded once. "Don't soften it." She flinched, then took a breath. She started the way people always do, by explaining her feelings instead of her choices. She talked about loneliness, about feeling unseen, about how life had narrowed into routines and responsibilities until she felt like she'd disappeared inside them. "He listened," she said. "He noticed me." "So did I replied quietly. She looked down. She said it started with messages. Nothing physical at first. Complaints, jokes, conversations that stretched late into the night. She told herself it was harmless because it felt easy. I asked her when it stopped being harmless. She hesitated. "At his place," she said finally. That detail mattered more than she realized. It meant planning. It meant intent. I asked how many times. She said she didn't know. I asked again. She gave me a number. I won't repeat it here. It was enough to make my chest tighten. When we got to the pregnancy, her voice changed. That was the one part she couldn't control. "I didn't think it would happen," she said. "I didn't think I could get pregnant so easily." "So you weren't careful," I said. She shook her head, crying now. "I didn't think about it." That sentence explained everything. I asked her if she knew there was a chance the baby wasn't mine. She nodded. "And you still told me it was," I said. She didn't answer. "I was hoping it would work out," she whispered. I stared at her. "You were hoping I'd raise another man's child without ever knowing." She didn't deny it. That hurt more than the affair itself. At some point, the apologies shifted into justifications. "You weren't there for me. You shut down." I felt invisible. I let her finish. Then I asked, "At what point did betraying me become the solution?" She looked at me like she'd never framed it that way before. I asked her why him. Out of everyone in the world. She hesitated, then said, "Because he felt safe." Safe, she chose him because she thought blood would protect her. Because she believed family would keep me quiet. Because she assumed I'd never question it. That realization settled heavy in my chest. I told her about the parking lot, about his hesitation, about how quickly his certainty fell apart. She cried harder, like she already knew how it had gone. When I told her I wanted a paternity test, she agreed immediately. Too quickly. That scared me more than if she'd argued. That night I slept in the guest room again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak around me. She hadn't just cheated. She'd rewritten our entire life without my consent, and expected me to live inside the lie. Now everything depended on one answer, and no matter what it was, nothing would ever be the same again. I thought keeping quiet was a form of control. If no one else knew, then maybe the damage could stay contained. Maybe I could decide when and how things fell apart. That illusion lasted exactly as long as silence was useful to the people who benefited from it. It wasn't useful to me anymore. The first crack came from my mother. She called one afternoon and asked gently if I was okay. Not "how are you," but "are you okay?" The kind of question that already knows the answer. I almost lied. Instead, I said, "No." There was a pause. Then she said, "Do you want to talk about it?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. 2 days later, she showed up at the house. Laura answered the door. I stayed in the hallway listening. Their voices were low at first, then stopped completely. Silence stretched. That's when I walked in. My mother looked at me once and understood something was very wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, so I told her. Not everything. Not the details that would scar her forever. But enough. I said my uncle's name. I said pregnancy. I said, "I don't know." When I finished, she sat very still. "No," she said quietly. Not him. I wanted certainty from her, immediate loyalty. Instead, she asked questions, careful ones. Could there be a misunderstanding? Was I sure? Each question hurt more than anger would have. When I told her the baby might not be mine, she finally broke, covered her mouth, shook her head, whispered prayers I hadn't heard since I was a kid. I'm so sorry, she said, reaching for my hand. This time, I believed it. She left shortly after. Laura didn't say a word until the door closed. You shouldn't have told her, she snapped. That stopped being your decision, I replied. She accused me of wanting to humiliate her, of destroying the family. I stared at her, stunned by how thoroughly she'd flipped the roles. You did this, I said. I'm just refusing to carry it alone. The truth didn't stop there. My mother called her brother. He denied everything, said I was confused, emotional, that Laura and I were having problems. That hurt more than I expected, not because it surprised me, but because he sounded practiced. Then his wife called me. I need you to tell me exactly what you know, she said. I hesitated. This was the line I didn't want to cross. Once she knew, there would be no clean edges left. But she deserved the truth more than anyone. So I told her. All of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." That single word terrified me. She told me she'd suspected something for months. Late nights, deleted messages, a distance she couldn't explain. She said she'd started questioning her own sanity. I'm going to confront him, she said, and I'm going to watch his face. That night, Laura unraveled. She begged, quietly, desperately. Please don't let this destroy everything, she said. I looked at her and realized something cold and final. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing control of the story. I packed a bag, not to leave forever, just to remind myself that I could. As I closed the zipper, my phone buzzed. A message from my uncle's wife. He admitted it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, breath leaving me in a slow, hollow exhale. Because now, the truth wasn't just mine, and there was no putting it back. Once the truth escaped the house, everything accelerated. What had been slow and suffocating suddenly felt sharp and urgent, like the world had decided it was done waiting. Laura didn't argue when I told her I wanted a paternity test. She didn't bargain or delay or cry her way around it. She just nodded. Okay, she said quietly. That scared me more than resistance would have. We scheduled the earliest appointment available. The days leading up to it felt unreal, stretched thin. I went to work and answered emails and sat through meetings, but none of it stuck. Every conversation felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. Laura stayed in the house. I didn't. I rotated between a friend's couch and my car, unable to settle anywhere. Every place felt temporary, like I was waiting for permission to exist again. She texted constantly at first. Apologies, fear, promises. Then the messages slowed, like she was bracing herself for something she already knew was coming. The night before the test, I didn't sleep at all. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last few years, combing through memories I'd once trusted. The signs were all there. I just hadn't wanted to read them. Trust does that. It edits reality for you. The clinic was bright and indifferent. Clipboards, forms, neutral smiles. To them, this was routine. To me, it was a verdict waiting to be sealed. We didn't sit together. We didn't talk. When it was over, we left separately, without discussion, without ceremony. There was nothing left to say. Waiting for the result was worse than everything before it. Days passed. Laura's messages changed tone again, less pleading, more resignation. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just hope you'll be okay. I didn't respond. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was alone in my car, parked outside a grocery store. Killing time, because I didn't want to be anywhere familiar when it happened. Unknown number. I answered. The woman's voice was calm, professional. She spoke clearly, efficiently, like she was reading off a screen. I listened, I thanked her, I hung up. The baby wasn't mine, I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just sat there, hands resting uselessly in my lap, feeling something drain out of me that I hadn't realized I was still holding. Empty. That was the word. I went back to the house to tell Laura. She deserved that much. She knew the moment she saw my face. No, she whispered. I shook my head. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. She kept saying she was sorry, again and again, like repetition might change biology. I watched her, and for the first time since this began, I felt nothing for her pain. Not anger, not satisfaction. Distance. What are you going to do? She asked finally. That was the real question. I need space, I said. I packed a bag. This time she didn't try to stop me. That night, alone again, the weight of it finally settled. Not relief, not devastation, finality. The test hadn't just answered a question. It had ended a story, and whatever came next would have to be built without lies. Leaving didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic decision, no single moment where I stood up and declared it was over. It happened quietly, in pieces, like something eroding instead of breaking. I stopped staying the night. Then I stopped answering messages right away. Then I stopped feeling like the house was mine at all. Laura noticed before she admitted it to herself. Her texts shifted again, less apologetic, more urgent. Please come home. We can still fix this. Don't throw everything away. I read them without anger, without satisfaction, just distance. That's how I knew it was ending. I went back one afternoon to collect more of my things. Clothes, books, small objects that somehow felt heavier than furniture ever could. Laura stood in the doorway watching me move through rooms we'd shared for years. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. I didn't stop packing. You're walking away from everything, she added. I turned then. No, I said, I'm walking away from pretending. She started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears sliding down her face as she leaned against the wall, like she needed it to stay upright. I made a mistake, she whispered. I shook my head. You made choices, and then you chose to lie about them. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was nothing left to defend. The separation itself was calm, almost unsettlingly so. No screaming phone calls, no public scenes. Just paperwork, logistics, and conversations stripped of emotion. We divided accounts, changed passwords, updated addresses. Each step felt unreal, like I was dismantling someone else's life. Friends asked questions. I gave simple answers. It's over. She cheated. I'm okay. I didn't explain the rest. Some details don't survive daylight. What surprised me most was how my body responded once the decision became real. I slept better. I ate normally. I stopped replaying conversations in my head at night. Grief was there, but it was clean. Nothing like the anxiety that had lived in me before. That constant tension had vanished the moment I stopped trying to make sense of lies. That told me I was doing the right thing. Laura asked to meet one last time, not to reconcile, to ask. We met in a park we used to walk through on weekends. She looked smaller somehow, worn down, like someone who'd finally run out of ways to rewrite the story. Is there any version of this where you stay? She asked. I thought about it carefully. Therapy? Time? Forgiveness forced into existence. Then I imagined myself years from now, still checking her phone, still questioning my instincts, still wondering what I didn't know. No, I said finally. There isn't. She nodded, eyes closed like she'd known the answer before asking. I hope you forgive me one day, she said. I hope one day, I replied, this doesn't follow me everywhere. That was the most honest thing I could offer. After that, everything moved quickly. Documents signed, keys returned, lives untangled. When it was done, I didn't feel relief. I felt quiet. Being alone after a long marriage is strange. There's freedom in it, but also disorientation. No shared routines, no default witness to your days. At first, the silence felt loud. Then it felt peaceful. I stopped explaining myself, stopped adjusting my tone to avoid conflict, stopped carrying someone else's secrets in my body. I started doing small things simply because I wanted to. Walking longer routes home, cooking meals that took time, sitting in silence without needing to fill it. It wasn't happiness, but it was honest. One night, months later, I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about betrayal. The realization startled me. Healing hadn't announced itself. It had crept in quietly, without permission. And in that moment, I understood something that would have terrified me earlier. I wasn't holding on anymore. Rebuilding doesn't feel like progress at first. It feels like standing still while the rest of the world keeps moving. People stop asking how you're doing after a while. They assume silence means you're better. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just means you've learned how to carry things without spilling them everywhere. I leaned into routine, not because I loved it, but because it kept my thoughts from drifting too far. Early mornings, long walks, simple meals, evenings spent doing nothing in particular. I avoided places that held too many memories and let new ones form quietly in their place. The house I moved into felt temporary for a long time. Boxes stayed unpacked. Pictures stayed face down. I didn't want to decorate a life I wasn't sure how to live yet. But something strange happened as weeks passed. I slept through the night. I stopped checking my phone reflexively. I stopped bracing when it buzzed. My body was learning something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The danger was over. Trust became the real work. Not trust in other people, trust in myself. I replayed old moments, testing my instincts against what I now knew, wondering how I'd missed things, how I'd explained away discomfort instead of listening to it. It was tempting to label my past self as naive. But that wasn't fair. I hadn't been blind. I'd been loyal. There's a difference. I started therapy not because I felt broken, but because I didn't want bitterness to calcify into my personality. I didn't want suspicion to become the lens through which I saw everything. The therapist asked me, "What scares you most now?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "That this will define me." She nodded. "Only if you let it." That stayed with me. Life grew quieter in ways I hadn't expected. Not empty, just calm. I laughed at things without forcing it. I caught myself humming while cooking. I went entire days without thinking about the betrayal, and when I noticed, it startled me. Healing wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with insight or closure. It arrived with normalcy. I ran into Laura once, unexpectedly, in a grocery store aisle. We stood there awkwardly, neither sure who we were to each other anymore. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. It surprised me that it was true. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't apologize or accuse. We said goodbye and went our separate ways. When I walked out of the store, I realized I felt lighter than I had walking in. Not forgiven, released. I didn't date, not out of fear, out of respect. I wanted to know that if I let someone close again, it would be because I chose them, not because I was trying to outrun loneliness. Loneliness, it turns out, is honest. It tells you exactly where you are, and where I was, slowly but steadily, was okay. One evening, sitting alone with a cup of coffee, I realized something had shifted. I no longer felt like someone things happened to. I felt like someone who responded, who adapted, who survived. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had stopped controlling the present. And in the space where fear used to live, something else had started to grow. Not certainty, not happiness, possibility. I wasn't looking for anyone. That's important because people like to believe healing ends in romance. Like, the reward for surviving something awful is immediately finding someone better. That wasn't where I was. I wasn't lonely in a desperate way. I wasn't searching for validation or proof that I was still wanted. I was content being unfinished. So when she entered my life, it didn't feel like fate. It felt incidental. I kept seeing her at the same coffee shop near my apartment. Same time most mornings. Same quiet corner. We exchanged nods for weeks without speaking. Familiar but distant, two people sharing space without obligation. One morning the line was unusually long. She sighed behind me and said mostly to herself, "If this place ever runs out of coffee, the city collapses." I laughed before I could stop myself. She smiled, surprised. I was hoping someone would agree. That was it. No spark. No moment. Just a sentence shared between strangers. After that we talked. Not intentionally. Not all at once. A comment here. An observation there. Nothing personal. Nothing heavy. It stayed light because neither of us tried to make it more. One day she asked if she could sit at my table. The shop was crowded. It made sense. We talked for 20 minutes. When she left, I realized something unsettling. I hadn't been guarded. Her name was Claire. She said it casually, like names didn't need ceremony. She didn't ask for mine right away. I appreciated that more than I knew how to explain. We started walking together after coffee sometimes. No plans, no expectations, just shared directions until one of us turned off. She listened in a way that felt rare, not polite, not performative. She didn't interrupt to relate everything back to herself. She didn't rush silence. She let conversations breathe. That alone felt disarming. The first personal question she asked caught me off guard. "Can I ask you something?" she said one afternoon. I nodded. "Why do you look like someone who's already lived through the worst part of a story?" I considered lying. Then I didn't. "I've been through something," I said. She nodded once. "That makes sense." She didn't ask more. That restraint felt like respect. I noticed how my body responded around her. I didn't tense when my phone buzzed. I didn't scan her expressions for inconsistency. I didn't brace for revelation. I wasn't hyper-aware. I was calm. That realization startled me more than attraction ever could. When I eventually told her about my marriage, it wasn't a confession. It was context. I didn't dramatize it or soften it. I said it ended because of betrayal. She listened. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said. Then she waited. No advice, no comparison, no urgency to fix anything. That silence felt safe. I realized then that I wasn't comparing her to Laura. There was nothing to compare. This wasn't a replacement. It wasn't a rebound. It was simply something new. And for the first time in a long while, new didn't feel dangerous. One night, driving home after dinner, I caught myself humming along to the radio. The sound surprised me. It had been years since that happened without effort. It wasn't happiness, it was ease. I didn't rush anything. Neither did Claire. There were no declarations, no pressure to define what this was becoming. Just consistency, presence, honesty without excavation. Trust grew quietly, the way it's supposed to. Sitting across from her one evening, I realized something with sudden clarity. I wasn't living in recovery anymore. I wasn't managing pain. I was simply living. And that realization, more than anything else, told me I'd survived. I didn't expect to hear from Laura again. By then, the past felt settled, not resolved, but quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something no longer follows you from room to room. I was building a life that didn't require constant explanation. Claire was part of it now, not as a rescue or a promise, but as someone who met me where I was and didn't ask me to be anyone else. Then my phone rang, a number I knew by heart. I let it ring longer than I should have. When I answered, her voice sounded different, flat, careful, like she'd rehearsed. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "The baby was born." I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need details. "He isn't involved," she added. "Not at all. He signed everything away, told people the baby wasn't his." There it was, the final rearrangement of blame. And? I asked. She hesitated. And he told them I lied. About everything. I waited for anger, for vindication, for the urge to argue. None of it came. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I needed you to know you weren't crazy. I know, I replied, and I meant it. There was a long silence. Then she said softer, You sound different. I am, I said. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask about my life. She didn't ask for forgiveness. The call ended the way it began, carefully. I set the phone down and felt something loosen inside me. Not triumph, not closure, finality. The truth had finished its work. That night, sitting across from Claire, I didn't mention the call. Not because it was a secret, but because it didn't belong in the room. Some endings don't need witnesses. She smiled at me mid-sentence and reached for my hand. I didn't flinch. I didn't think. I stayed. Later, lying awake, I understood something that had taken me a long time to learn. The betrayal didn't define me. The blood didn't bind me. The truth didn't break me. It clarified me. It taught me what loyalty feels like when it's real, what honesty sounds like when it isn't forced, what peace looks like when it arrives quietly and stays. I don't hate Laura. I don't forgive her either. I simply don't carry her anymore. And that, more than answers, more than justice, more than being right, is freedom. This story doesn't end with revenge or redemption or a neat bow. It ends with me, steady, awake, and no longer afraid of what I know. And for the first time in a very long time, that's enough.